Hi, everyone. I'm Raj Kumar, President and Editor-in-Chief of Devex. And as we get toward the pre-summit for the Food Systems Summit, pre-summit's in July, Food Systems Summit in September, we wanted to have a conversation about smallholder farmers in particular and where they fit in to the complex rubric that is food systems. And we have two fantastic people to join us for that discussion. Gilbert Houngbo, who is, of course, the president of the International Fund for Agricultural Development. And we have Ruramiso Mashumba, who's the National Youth Chairperson for the Zimbabwe Farmers Union. And I wanted to just begin with you, Gilbert, if I can. This Food Systems Summit, there's a lot of anticipation for it. What are you hoping will actually come out of it? You've been working on investing in rural communities, smallholder farmers for so many years. What do you actually think this summit is going to bring for your work?
I mean, when we start this whole initiative, first of all, thank you for having us on your show today. One thing that is very clear is to create a momentum because we know that the ODA for ag has been stalling at 5% or so for years, and investment, Ruramiso will certainly confirm, investment in ag still look like not the best. People don't see that as the most exciting thing. So for us, we want to really create a momentum, which is one. Secondly, is important serving the rural community and the smallholders who produce in Africa, for example, 80% of all the calorie intake. We want to make sure that they are at the center of the debate and making sure that all the failures, not only market failures, but all the failures throughout the value chain are identified and provide for. Thirdly, we're looking at that also from the perspective, not only in terms of food security, but the perspective also for food being a health issue and food being a source of decent employment and decent income generation. Those are some of the key things that we really are expecting from the Food Systems Summit. Over.
And maybe, Gilbert, as a good example, we have Ruramiso here who is on the farm and they haven't had electricity for a couple of days, which is why you're in your car, Ruramiso. We're hoping we'll keep you on for the duration of this. What do you think about smallholder farmers and the community you serve of smallholders? Where do they fit into this big conversation about food systems and what the summit is meant to tackle?
Okay, thank you for that question. So, you know, smallholder farmers produce most of the food that's eaten on the continent. And for so long, people have forgotten the importance of smallholder farmers in terms of even when we talk about regenerative agriculture. So it's very important to put them in the middle of this dialogue to see how can we together produce food with using less energy, as well as making sure that we still feed the same amount of people. Smallholder farmers are also affected most by things like climate change. We have been seeing the earth is getting more and more warmer, and what sort of tools are out there to make sure that smallholder farmers can access them so that they're able to produce food sustainably. So smallholder farmers really play a pivotal part in this discussion at the Food Summit.
Yeah, Gilbert, when I think of food systems, I mean, naturally, when you think of the idea of a big system, all the interconnected parts, maybe you think about large-scale agriculture. Where do the smallholders actually fit into the future of the food system from your perspective?
First of all, as I said, we have to keep in mind that the small-scale producers remain those that are producing most of the calorie intake on that. Yeah, that was very clear. And we know that in low-income countries, including in Africa and Asia, we know that more than 60% of the population remain rural. And the global poverty, 80% of poverty is in a rural area. So we know that the answer of lifting up people from poverty will come through how we deal with the small-scale producers. So it's not, it is about, and it has to be about the small scale. Yes, it is also about the agribusiness, the commercial, the large scale. All of that are complementary. This is part of what we're trying to do here. Identify how we can create much more synergy between the small scale holders and the large producer being a market for the small scale producers. And the other way around, the innovation, the technology being made available and affordable for the small-scale producers. So, as Ruramiso have said, we can ensure not only inclusion but sustainability in their endeavors.
Yeah, IFAD, in fact, is leading one of the action tracks. There's 5 action tracks at the summit. You're leading action track 4, which is advancing equitable livelihoods and value distribution, which is exactly what you just talked about. I wonder, Ruramiso, when you think about the idea of an equitable food system, what Gilbert and his colleagues at IFAD are trying to advance, what do you want to see come out of the summit to actually get us moving in that direction?
Okay, so what I would like to see come up a lot at this summit is the importance of smallholder farmers and how we can have action-based solutions. For so long, we've discussed the challenges that smallholders are faced with, and we've also discussed some solutions, but we haven't really had much action-based solutions. So if we can come out of this summit with action-based solutions on how exactly can we begin to bring in smallholder farmers to the table in terms of decision making, how can we make sure that smallholder farmers are part of this dialogue on regenerative agriculture? How can we ensure that smallholder farmers are not left behind and not using traditional methods of farming? And smallholder farmers are most affected by things like climate change. So we really need to focus on that and see what sort of methods are out there that we can support smallholder farmers to make sure that they are more climate resilient in this near future.
Gilbert, we asked our audience for questions, and we had an interesting question that came from Sami Khan at the CDC Group, one of the world's biggest development finance institutions. Sami directs strategy for the food and agribusiness sector, and basically says they've experienced that there aren't that many large-scale investment projects across Africa and in the ag space and the food space, and some of the bigger players, including multinational corporations, are still hesitant to invest in the continent. And he's wondering, is there anything we can do to catalyze some of these bigger players to get into and including regional players, into the food and agricultural projects in Africa at a larger scale, backed by DFIs like CDC, and to be more scalable and integrated and inclusive over the long term, including smallholder farmers? What do you want to see happen out of the summit that maybe will help drive some of those larger scale agricultural projects that include smallholders?
Clearly, one of our expectation is really to have much more finance made available to the small-scale producers. So rural finance is clearly one of the key things that we are pushing for. As a matter of fact, together with the Italian and the French, we really are pushing to really bring together all the public development bank so that together we can really have better synergy in financing agriculture for small scale to larger investment needed for the sector. In addition to the finance is the technology. As I was referring to, we need the innovation to get down there to the small scale producer so that they can improve their productivity and so that they can practice much more environment-friendly agriculture practices, ensure that we can reduce the food waste and loss and all the challenge we have throughout the value chain. So technology innovation is the second. To do that, we all have to work together. So in addition to the example I gave in terms of the Public Development Bank, we are also aware that there are a lot of initiatives that hopefully we're all going to discuss during the pre-summit here in Rome before getting to the summit in New York. Over.
Thank you, Gilbert. And Ruramiso, if you're still with us, and maybe she is not, I think we may have lost her. So let me come to you, Gilbert, with one additional question, and we can see if she's able to rejoin us. So Gilbert, we're getting close to the summit in Rome, where you're based. And then we'll have our major summit in September in the UN General Assembly. What are some action steps that can be taken in this period? Like what is your call to action to leaders, to the community, people who are going to be part of this summit, including farmers and smallholders, to make sure that their voices are heard in this debate, that they push this summit in the right direction? What's your call to action, Gilbert?
Listen, in terms of the voice, making sure the rural community, the small-scale holders' voice I heard, I must admit that it is already happening. You know, as part of this process, the UN Special Envoy Secretariat, together with colleagues, including IFAD, we have been working very hard to create dialogues within country, national level, from different countries, but what I want to mention here is the dialogue we are organizing within the farmers organizations, the indigenous people, the youth, to make sure, first of all, that their voice are heard in that process, which is one. Secondly, the call for action is really coming out of the summit, not simply with a series of resolution or declaration, but with a concrete action plan. So I'm aware of a different group proposing different action that will be implemented post-summit. So my call is this summit to be an action-oriented summit with a proper follow-up and measurement of its success in the year to come. And that's different actions are different level from the not only for all the tracks from the scientific community, the humanitarian side. You have the school feeding that the WFP and others are initiating. You have a series of business community ways to make sure that we can improve the availability of seeds and fertilizers to the small scale producers. Something that is very, very close to my heart is the traceability in the food industry. I really will hope and calling for the leader to push to make sure that that coffee producer in Colombia or in Cote d'Ivoire, that they receive at the end of the day a minimum evidence-based living income to make sure that they can continue living decently from their production of coffee, for example. So
that should be possible today, right, Gilbert? I mean, with traceability, if you as a consumer know where you're buying your product from and you know where it's coming from, the whole chain, how people are treated along the way, that can be transformative.
That could be a transformative initiative. The traceability is one thing, but traceability linked to how much the coffee that you are paying in New York City at $5 or $4, how much of it is going to that small-scale coffee producer to start with. And we should be able to have that part of the label for the consumer to know, for example. So I'm also really pushing in that direction.
I think that's what's so powerful about the framing of this issue as a food system, right? We've had many UN summits on food and malnutrition and hunger. This is different because we're thinking about the entire system and how it's connected. And that, as you say, it becomes much more relevant to everyone on this planet, whether you live in a rural community or you just consume food that comes from a rural community. This matters to you.
And not only it's really across the board, and it's also across the SDGs. Obviously, when you talk about food, we talk automatically about poverty, SDG 1. We talk about women that you know that mostly in the rural area, the agriculture sector are women, and therefore the linkage with SDG 5, the SDG on climate change, the youth, the inequalities. So it's really across the bodies, the whole system. And also why we insisted on that system approach is that some of the failure, although, and I made it clear that we really are pushing for much more finance and rural finance, but some of the failures are not necessarily finance related. So by looking at that, the system, the entirety of the systems, we can provide corrective actions and taking initiative to address some of the failure, which may not always require necessarily additional financing.
Well, we've lost Ruramiso, but I want to thank her. And maybe her situation is emblematic of what we're talking about, that she hasn't had electricity for a couple of days on her farm. These things are so connected, of course. But Ruramiso Mashumba, I want to thank her. I want to thank you, Gilbert Houngbo. And there's a lot of anticipation looking forward to the summit. You've helped to explain why it's so important. And we're looking forward to see what you and IFAD bring together in this action track number 4. Thank you for your time today, Gilbert.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me today.